Welcome to the Steve Stein Guitar Podcast, where we bring you the latest insights, tips, and techniques to help you master the art of guitar playing. I'm your host, Steve Stein, and I'm committed to sharing my passion for the guitar while inspiring you and guiding you through your musical journey. Now remember that you can enjoy this podcast from anywhere and anytime, whether you're cruising down the highway, preparing dinner in the kitchen, or even working out at the gym. By incorporating the podcast into your daily routine, you'll be able to stay inspired and motivated in your guitar journey, no matter where life takes you. Now, let's dive into today's podcast. Hey, Steve here. Thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. What we're going to be talking about today is learning songs note for note versus learning them in a way that works better for you for a number of different reasons. Okay, so let's just start off talking about that. If you grew up like me back in the day when there was no internet and YouTube and, 1 billion teachers at your disposal, you learned how to play by ear, or you were lucky enough to maybe have somebody near you that could teach you, but then you were learning from their way of thinking, right? Which is there's nothing wrong with, but that is the truth. I mean, if you wanted to learn how to play a song from your neighbor or your uncle or whatever it might be, or a guitar teacher that you had in your neighborhood, you were learning it the way that they learned how to play it, which would have either been by ear, again, or from somebody doing the same thing. This is how this worked. And so I think what was good about that was people that learned how to play by ear learned to listen to music maybe a little bit differently, visualize their fretboard a little bit differently, and make a musical connection, not just a visual connection, but a musical connection of hearing sounds and then trying to describe those sounds on their guitar. Not just visualization, but really listening to something and then trying to decipher what it is and place it on your fretboard. And I don't know, how much people do that anymore now that we have YouTube and everything like that. And it doesn't matter. It's not good or bad. I'm just saying this is the reality of things. And so when I'll tell you my experience, and then I'm going to give you a couple of different examples of things. But when I learn songs, my job isn't to restructure the song and change the chords into something it's not, or whatever it might be. My job is to try and do the song as much justice as I can, but at some point, there are limitations that are going to come in, right? The obvious limitations. I may not be able to play a part the exact same way that somebody that wrote the song played that part, simply because my experiences are completely different, or my technique is different, or the visualization of my fretboard is different, or all these different kinds of things. Now, there's nothing wrong with going, okay, so what I want to do is I want to learn how to see it or play it or whatever the same way that this person did for that experience. That's perfectly great. And it really is. But now let's add in some other parameters. Let's say you have to learn this song and it's a complex song and you have to learn it by, next weekend, and today is Friday. So you have 1 week to learn it. You might not be able to adapt those skills or adopt those skills in 7 days to be able to play it that way. And even if you could, it may not resonate in your memory in a proper way to where you're going to be able to execute that on stage in front of 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 people or whatever it might be, whatever situation you find yourself in. And you might try forever and still not be able to do it exactly that way, no matter what it is you want to do. And here's the kicker. A lot of times, the artists themselves don't play it that way. It happened in the studio, and then that was it. And you might have heard me talk about this before, but I think it's really important that we understand this, because it's not just a matter of, oh, you're not good enough to do whatever. We could take an artist like Steve Vai and then take an artist like Emmanuel and take, whoever. I mean, it could be anybody. Michael Britt, for instance, if you know who Michael is. We could take all three of these artists, and they're all incredibly talented artists, and I love them all. And they don't play anything like each other. And every day they wake up, they don't go, oh, I wish I could play like that. Maybe they could say that, but they're not going to go, okay, I'm going to get rid of everything that I am to become. Emmanuel wakes up and says, I'm going to be Steve Vai. Or Steve Vai wakes up and says, I'm going to be Michael Britt. Or Michael Britt wakes up and says, I'm going to be Emmanuel, or whatever. Because they can't. They're different people. They do what they do incredibly well. And then they do other things. You know, if you've been to, for instance, a G3 show that Steve Vai's on, and they do a jam to Little Wing or a jam to whatever song that they're jamming for that tour, it's not like they're trying to play it the way Jimi Hendrix played it. They're doing it their own way. Now, is that good or bad? Well, that's entirely up to you to decide. For me, it's irrelevant. It's not good or bad. It's just, that's welcome to music, okay? So that gets us into the category of jam songs. Well, some songs are jammy. Well, maybe Jimi Hendrix would disagree with that if he could, right? Maybe Little Wing isn't jammy. Maybe it's more structured than we're giving it credit for, but we just approach it from a jammy perspective versus some other song, you see? And so it's very important to understand that those parameters or those limitations are the reality of what we're dealing with when we approach songs. It's not necessarily, certainly isn't for me, it's not that you're lazy, it's that you are an established player playing the way that you play with the history and the experiences and the practice mechanisms that you have acquired, and that's who you've become. Now, you can always change that. Again, I'm not saying that you can't become, you know, add on or elevate from where you are. Of course you can. But you have to ask yourself, is this one song, this one experience, the thing that's going to change everything about who you are? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Okay, so let me give you some examples, for instance. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read this article from Marty Friedman. Marty Friedman from Megadeth, Marty Friedman from Cacophony, you know, all kinds of different things, if you know who Marty Friedman is. One of my favorite guitar players on the planet, absolutely. So here's what he says. He says, after I left Megadeth, I didn't really follow a few of the guys that they had after me. I'm sure they were fantastic because that's just the kind of band it is. But if I think of other Megadeth guitarists, I think of how Chris Poland, who was an earlier guitar player, how Chris Poland was in the band before I was in it. I hated copying his stuff. I couldn't do it. This is Marty Friedman, right? Incredible guitar player. Just talking about exactly what I'm talking about. I hated copying his stuff. I couldn't do it. It was just too alien. Like any, you know, super musician, they've got their own stamp on it, and there's no way for one person to step in that other person's shoes. I'm going to read that again. They've got their own stamp on it, and there's no way for one person to step into that other person's shoes. It's impossible. I love his playing. I hated trying to copy that. Just a super, super guitar player and a really great guy, too. We toured together once. That's the whole thing, okay, is that you have your own thing, and hopefully you'll keep elevating that thing and cultivating that style or whatever it is that you're trying to do. But you are not Marty Friedman. You are not Chris Poland. You are not Tommy Emmanuel. You are not Steve Vai. So when we look at a band, for instance, like, I always use Ozzy as an example. So if we go back to Randy Rhoads and we look at a trademark guitar solo like Crazy Train, or you pick whichever one you want, and then you start looking at live or hearing, you don't see a lot, but you'll hear different live recordings of Randy, and Randy did not always play the solos the way they were on the album. Maybe it was a thing, and then over time it merged and became something else, okay? And then you hear Jakey Lee, or you hear Zakk Wylde, or you hear whoever approaching some of the things that Randy would have done, or some of the things that Tony Iommi would have done, or some of the things that Jakey Lee would have done before Zakk Wylde, right? Whatever, they're not exactly the same, because this exact same thing is happening. They might be utilizing certain key elements of that solo in their solo, but then from there, they're putting their own spin on things. Why? Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. A, they don't want to play it exactly the same. B, they can't play it exactly the same. C, there's a time limit. D, I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons why something like that would happen. But it's a reality. You know, I just think it's so important that at some point you start trying to develop your own voice and your own style on your guitar, whatever that means, versus, you know, just sitting in your studio or in your room or your whatever, you know, practicing one guitar solo for a year and a half, trying to perfect that one guitar solo. And if you are, again, that's great. If that makes you happy, that's great. But if you think about all the other things you could have been doing in that amount of time as well, you know, developing your improvisation skills, developing your theory skills, developing your fretboard skills, developing your musical skills, you know, your concept of phrasing, your jamming with other musicians, your songwriting, there's a million things that could be happening at that same time. Okay? So it's just something to think about. So let me give you a couple of examples. I'm looking at a list here. So YYZ, Alex Lifeson. Alex Lifeson, I love Alex Lifeson's guitar playing. I love his songwriting. Alex Lifeson is an awkward guitar player in that he does his own thing his own way. Like, it is not just, I'm in a scale and I'm going to do a scale thing. He's like all over the place doing shapey stuff and weird sounding things and all that sort of thing. And Alex Lifeson will be the first one to tell you he has no idea what he played on the album. And then he'll have to go back and listen to it and try and kind of figure it out, or he'll just go, I'll just start all over. Dream Theater, you know, they'll have these long jam sessions in some of their songs. And it might be a song that they haven't played for a long time. And now they have different members in the band. Maybe Jordan is now in the band, and Mike Mangini is now in the band, or whatever. And they're working on some material from a long time ago that they haven't played, and they certainly haven't played together as a band. So what happens oftentimes is that jammy section changes. Now, why did they change it? Maybe they couldn't remember how exactly it went at that you know, back in the day when they originally recorded that. Or maybe they changed it so it's more comfortable for the new members to execute, to play together, to merge as a band, whatever it might be. But these are artists that it's their own music, right? Just like Marty Friedman was talking about. So, you know, we could approach a solo and go, hey, I want to play it note for note. And again, as I just said, there's nothing wrong with that. But I also believe there's nothing wrong with putting your own spin on it so it makes sense not only in your physicality, but the way you're viewing the fretboard. So let's think about that for a second. Let me give you another one. Cliffs of Dover by Eric Johnson. An amazing artist with an amazing song. And I've played this song on stage a number of times, and I love playing it. I do not phrase and visualize the fretboard the same way Eric Johnson does. I wish I could. There's amazing I love Eric Johnson's playing. I absolutely love it. You know, guys like him and Andy Timmons and just players like that are so amazing, so melodic, so musical. But there are elements of the phrasing that he does that just isn't me. Now, it doesn't mean that I couldn't develop it, but I have to weigh that against everything else I have going on, and I don't carry around a lot of guilt walking around going, yeah, I'm going to play that part in Cliffs of Dover a little different than, you know, Eric Johnson does, and I feel terrible about it. I don't feel terrible about it. I've got my whole life that I've got to deal with, and this song is one microcosm of the billions of things that I have going on in my life. So it's okay. So my choices are either I will not play this song because I cannot play it, and choose to not try to play it exactly the same way that Eric Johnson does, or I can go, okay, I'm going to do it the way that it works for me. And that way we can still do it, have some fun with it, and it works into my world, and we're good to go. That works for me. And it's not only the licks and things like that that I change, it's also sometimes the phrasing, no, not the phrasing, the positions of which he's playing. So for instance, when I first learned how to play Cliffs of Dover, I did it without any tablature. And it was a struggle because there's a lot of stuff going on in there. So the way I learned how to visualize it was very different. So if, for instance, if I took that main riff, that whole thing. So this, if you can see it on video, if you can't, it's fine. But if you can see it on video, I'm not playing it how he plays it. I don't even know how he plays it, but I know he doesn't play it here. Now, as I'm doing that, I'm thinking about, you know, palm muting and all these. Like that's the technical aspect that I would start thinking about more, which I'm not worried about right now, but you get the idea. So I'm playing the notes right, but the position is completely different. Now, does that make it wrong? Well, you might say yes, you might say no. This goes back to that same Tony Iommi story where Tony would play, he played up here, but when you watch every other guitar player that Ozzy plays with, almost never do they play it up here. They're always going to play it here. So if they're playing it in a different spot, does that make them wrong? Well, again, for me, it's not right or wrong. It's what do you want to do? It's not even a question of right or wrong. It's a question of what makes sense to you and how do you want to play it, because you're the one now playing with Ozzy in front of all these people, and you've got to do what you got to do the way you do it. You're not Tony Iommi. And even if you play it up there, all these people in the audience, 0.03% care for this reason we're talking about right now. You'll once in a while get, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but you'll once in a while get these YouTube snobs that will go, well, that's not right because whatever. And then I often wonder, well, have you ever played in an actual band before? Because in the real world, things are different than they are just sitting by yourself jamming to whatever. And I'm not knocking that. I'm not saying that that's good or bad. What I'm saying is you do you and figure out what works best for you. I think that's really important. Another example would be, again, going back to Little Wing. We look at Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix. We look at Little Wing by Steve Vai. Both, in my opinion, amazing versions of that song. I love Jimi Hendrix. I've always loved Jimi Hendrix. And I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. Now, Stevie Ray Vaughan this is a perfect example of paying homage to the idea of Little Wing, but is he trying to replicate it note for note? So is he wrong then in just the same example I just gave you for this person that's saying that it's wrong that you're doing this versus this? So that means that Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan is wrong. He's wrong for playing Little Wing that way. Or is it okay for him because he's quote unquote famous? So it's okay for him, but it's not okay for you to change it. You see? So just think about that a little bit. I think it's really important that this conversation is a real and valid thing for you and the people that you play with. Sometimes we do this because there is a limitation, just like Marty Friedman was saying. Marty Friedman is an amazing guitar player, but that doesn't mean he can play like Chris Poland. That means he can play like Marty Friedman. And I guarantee you, if Chris Poland tried to be Marty Friedman, he's not going to be able to do it either, right? So we all have to find our place. I remember hearing Kiko from Megadeth, who's the newest guitar player, who's been with them for quite a long time. But Kiko will try and do the best he can with some of those solos, but he's not Marty Friedman either. You know what I mean? He's paying homage as best he can in whatever capacity he chooses, but they're not note for note. They're not exact. They're still going to be, and rightfully so, Kiko's got to be in there too, because he's the one playing them, So anyway, think about that a little bit. Hopefully that helps you a little bit. And remember, if you're looking for any, guitar lesson information, always go over and check out GuitarZoom.com. I thank you so much for listening. If you're watching this somewhere, I thank you for that. And, sign up, follow my social stuff and anything that it helps. I just really, really appreciate your time. And if you watch my stuff and you enjoy what I'm doing, I thank you for that too. So take care, stay positive, and I'll talk to you soon. If you like our podcast and want to hear more, remember to press the subscribe button on the app that you listen to. By doing this, you help us a lot, and you'll be the first to know when we have new episodes ready for you to listen to. Is this podcast fun and useful? Then please give it a thumbs up and write about how much you like it. Is this podcast not what you thought it would be? Please let us know. This helps us to make our podcast better and helps more people who love guitar find it as well. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us what you think.